Hello, my name is Barbara Avila, and I am going to be presenting to you on this webinar, whatever you want to call it, about how to manage aggressive behaviors at home. And I have a lot of information packed into this, so I'm just going to go. And any topic is so deep and we can go into it further. So I'm hoping that if you have questions, you will use my email or go to my website or whatever and ask me more information, because this really is just packed full of information that I would love to talk to you further about, but we only have an hour. So here we go. So first I want to talk to you about the steps that you need to take, or that will be helpful in taking, if your child is being aggressive with you or others. So this whole presentation is specific to aggression and those kinds of behaviors. So first and foremost, you heard me in the last session that it is always most important to take care of yourself. And this is so that you can be in a place to respond rather than react. And the other piece that I wanted to say about this is that if you aren't taking care of yourself, you can't be there in that moment for your child. And the interesting thing that we're learning about the brain is it is not a natural process for us to go towards something that is someone who is making us fearful. So somebody who is hitting you or throwing things or screaming in your face is not somebody that neurologically you're going to go towards. So you are fighting against your own neurological system in that moment. And so it's going to take a lot of brain power to overcome that and be the parent that you want to be and be in the moment with your child when they are having aggressive behaviors. So I just wanted to do this slide real quickly to also just talk about if you're in fight or flight mode, like you can see that this man might be, you can see his face is angry, he's holding his child's shoulders, he's above eye level. So he's doing a lot of things that are putting his son's neurological system also into fight or flight, which is not what we want, right? And so if you are taking care of yourself, you're being mindful of those kinds of things, you're not going to get yourself into this kind of stance with your child where it just becomes a standoff. I mean, really, it just, there isn't much that will be good that comes from it. So first I want to talk about how you can adjust the environment. So say you have a child who's hitting, kicking, throwing things, biting, screaming, etc. Any of those things. The first thing that you can do, because I want to empower you, the first thing that you can do is adjust the environment. And I'm going to talk about a few ways that you can do that. So you can declutter. And there's a handout that goes along with this that looks very similar. There's two of them actually. So you can declutter your life. So what that means is that you can reduce noise around you. So of course, reducing your talking is going to support a lot of situations. So only using words that are essential to given situations. You can also reduce noise, for example, of fans that are on, TVs that are on, radios that are on, things like that. So it's amazing how much we will respond to noise in our systems rather than it being fully cognitive. So you might not even realize. So take a moment to really look around your house and think about, is there noise that I can control that can be reduced? Then the next thing is in reducing visual clutter. So if there are things around your house, on the tables, on the, you have a lot of furniture, you have things that are on the walls, things like that, that's a lot to take in for anybody, and especially those with auditory processing disorders or sensory needs, that they're either going to take all that information in and just be overwhelmed, or they're going to be distracted. So either way, it's always a good idea to reduce your visual clutter just to the things that are essential or that are meaningful to you. The next one is reducing materials. Now, this one is very specific to if you're going to be doing something with your child. So this is, for example, if you are wanting to even have a meal with your child and you're wanting them to sit down and be able to eat with you as a family or whatever, you might consider not having a ton of stuff on the tables, like other things going on for one, and then only the amount that you are expecting them to eat, rather than if you have a full plate, but you're only really expecting them to eat a little bit of it. That's going to be a confusing message for kids. So reducing the materials. That could also be if you're wanting to play blocks. You're not going to offer hundreds of blocks in a tub. You might just offer 10 or 20 of them, where that just gives a much different message of that declutter message, where these are the only things that I'm expecting right now for you to play with or to manipulate or whatever. So reducing materials. The last one is reduce activities. Now this one, I love this one. In decluttering your life, I want you to do a little bit of thinking about what you're doing on a daily basis. So if you're in the car getting your child or children to different events and different activities because you think they need that, and you don't have time to spend with your own child and do some of the things that we talk about, for example, in this, you need to reduce your activities. Kids get overwhelmed and overscheduled. You've probably heard that in the media. There's a lot of people who talk about that now, but it really is true. If you're going from one thing to another, we all get tired, and kids don't have the same level of stamina that we do as adults. So they're going to get tired even faster than we do. And they're trying to soak in so much information. They need time, downtime. They need time to be able to digest the information that they're getting as well. So reducing the activities might just go much further than you think in reducing overall aggressive behavior, no matter where you're seeing it. So if your child's only aggressive at school, even reducing your activities after school or something like that may definitely help. If your child is only aggressive during transitions, reducing the activities, reducing the materials, all of this may help, because then your child has more resources during that time that's tough. Okay? So I'm going to move on to kind of this overall message that I want to make sure that I impart for you, is the whole idea of slowing down. And I don't have it on here, but slow down to speed up. We think we're in this mindset lately in society that we have to do more and we have to be faster and make people faster. You know what? That is not going to help anyone be less aggressive, less stressed, less anxious, less fight or flight mode. So just slowing down and doing less. So that goes with the reduced activities, but connecting more. So slowing down to actually connect. And I often give this assignment, you can take it if you want to, of just 10 minutes per day with your child, of turning off cell phones, including yours, turning off the TV, etc., and just being with your child for 10 minutes a day. Now, every child is different. Sometimes you have to have toys with you and that you play and you follow your child's lead for 10 minutes per day. That's fine. But if you have an older child or you're interested in just being with your child and it not being that the toy is more important than you, spending 10 minutes a day just to do back and forth play, sometimes singing, sometimes, if you have a preschooler, some of those preschool songs or those games are really, really fun. So anyway, the 10 minutes just to connect. I do recommend with that 10 minutes to also have it be scheduled. So for you to make sure that you can be consistent with it, because I really am talking 10 minutes a day. If you have multiple children, you can take turns. So if you have 2 kids, dad can do 10 minutes, or mom and the other caregiver can do 10 minutes and you can switch off. So then it's 20 minutes. So make it manageable, but make it consistent, because it is really important, especially in our society today, and especially if you have a child who is overwhelmed by sensory issues or autism and has social engagement needs. All right. I keep clicking on it and it keeps telling me, okay, I think if I just click there. Okay. So I'm going to move my picture again here. So this one, I want you to think about shifting to the positive. I have lots of conversations with wonderful parents. And by the time they come into my office or they're watching something like this, sometimes they've gotten onto and I should say we, because I'm a parent too, and we get into kind of the spiral of negativity where we're just noticing the things that are hard. We're just noticing the things that aren't going so well. So take a moment, maybe even a week, to shift to the positive as a whole household. So not just for your child with sensory issues or autism, but all your kids, your partner, etc. Think of shifting to the positive, spotlighting those good moments. I know that sounds a little cliche, but it really can make a huge difference in shifting our mindset, our attitude, and our ability to be there for our children at the same time as it is kind of boosting their confidence, because when their confidence is boosted, they're going to have more resources and not necessarily need to use aggression. So the last one also, well, before that, I should say, to spotlight the good moments. So lots of people do this different ways. One way that I really like is that once an hour, if you're with your child or children for an extended period of time, once per hour, to put your hand on their back, if that's okay with them, and say something like, something nice. So in my last presentation like this, I talked about how important curiosity to you is and how to use touch effectively for spotlighting the positive. So this would be a moment to put your hand, allow curiosity to you, their attention shift, and then say something like, I like how you're playing right now, or I like that project you're working on, or you're working really hard, or just a smile, or just a kiss on the cheek, or a hug. Okay? So the next part of this is pick your battles. So I'm going to get into this in a little bit, but picking your battles, I don't want you to feel like you have to, if you have a child who's aggressive, I don't want you to think that you have to address everything all at once. So you might be spotlighting the positive, but then choose 1 to 3, and we'll talk about that in a minute, things that are negative that are happening and how to approach those. That'll keep you kind of more balanced if you're picking your battles rather than thinking that you need to address everything all at once. The cool thing with that too is that sometimes you get the benefit because you've addressed one behavior, you get the benefit of the rest of the behaviors kind of falling into place because your child feels better. So anyway, start with 1 to 3. So this is another big concept that I want to share with you that comes up almost every single time I work with families. Kids want control over their lives. It's a great thing. They want what's called personal agency. They want to be empowered. They want to know, the only way that we can make good decisions is by having practice, having control to make the decisions. And so try and figure out where in your child's life you can give them control so they don't feel like they have to take it. Because it's very, very natural for kids to want control. And when I say that, I'm not saying control in a manipulative way. I'm saying control in that developmental way of that personal agency, just having power over your own self, your effect on others, etc. All good things. So we're just going to try and shift. If they're trying to take control by being aggressive, we're going to shift that energy to them having control in ways that are appropriate. So some great ones are giving choices within a non-choice is one of my favorite ways to say it. If you're headed out the door and you want to say, that transition is going to be hard, and oftentimes the time that they might be aggressive, you might say, do you want to carry your backpack or your lunch? And you're heading out the door. Because right away that takes them out of that battle, that control battle, and gives them control over something that they can make a choice. That is a choice within a non-choice. You're still leaving. What do you want to take with you? Just takes the battle out of it, still gives them control. The other thing, and the picture here says, when you believe in someone, you empower them to believe in themselves. So the whole message, when you give a child control, the whole message is that you're saying, I believe that you can do this. I believe that you can rise to the occasion and have choice in this matter for us to walk out the door. If you already are in the mindset of not giving them control, you're just telling them they need to get out the door and whatever, and they need to earn this if they're not going to earn this if they don't get out the door now, you're not empowering them. And so they're not going to believe in themselves. They're not going to internalize that. They're actually going to potentially internalize, oh, I can't do it. I need to have somebody cue me through this. Okay? And then they're going to try and take control somewhere else. All right? All right. Next concept. This one, I love this one. So we all love to feel helpful. Children naturally love to feel helpful. Sometimes when somebody has some developmental delays, especially autism or social needs or sensory needs, sometimes kids who are experiencing that won't be the first ones to try and get involved in things on their own with you. So they're not the little kid who's coming along and trying to help you with laundry because they see you doing it. They're not the one who's going to be in the kitchen with you trying to participate because they see you doing it. That does happen in typical development, often, not always, but I do see this a lot as something that doesn't necessarily happen as naturally when a child is experiencing something like autism or sensory needs. That doesn't mean that they're not interested in it, or it just means it hasn't dawned on them to try it. So what I want you to think about is that you may have to take the lead on this one of inviting your child in to partner with you in everyday activities. And what I mean by that is partnering with your child means not you do this and I'm going to stand over here, like you mix this bowl. But can you see in this picture how dad or whoever this is holding the bowl and the child is stirring? That is an essential partnership, because I'm going to guess if that little kid has two hands on the handle and if dad wasn't holding the bowl would be going all over the place and it wouldn't really work. So make each role essential to one another. You can switch roles too. So he can be stirring for a little while till he's tired, and then you can switch and then you hold the bowl while I do it. Making each role essential is very, very important. Kids can see right through us if we're not being authentic. So if you're trying to make a partnership of carrying something that's really light, most children are going to be like, you can carry it on your own because that's not very heavy. So you might want to get something that's kind of heavy, where you could carry it on your own if you absolutely had to, but it's really so much more helpful if you have a second pair of hands to carry something with you. I do have two handouts on this, one that really details out partnering, and then one that has just ideas for partnering, because it really is anything that you're doing in lifestyle. You can clean up a room together by one person holding the bin and the other person putting your child putting stuff into the bin. It gives you a little bit of control as to where you're going to be. A child needs to read where you are, your nonverbal interactions. It helps them feel like they're a part of something. There's so much beautiful stuff that can happen with just partnering. Opening something, you need help, that kind of thing. The one piece that I do want to mention is that if you can find a partnership that has kind of a continued rhythm, so this one is a good one because you can't just stir once and be done, which is very common for a lot of kids on spectrum or sensory needs, that they do one thing and they're very compliant, but then they don't realize that sustaining is what you're asking them to do. So you might have to be on top of that one. But if you can get kind of a rhythm going, you might even go 1, 2, 3, stirring that bowl. You have the capability then of changing it up a little bit and being a little bit surprising, which means that you're going to give them practice with when somebody in their lives isn't quite as predictable, it puts them in a state of curiosity, anticipation, unpredictability, which is so hard sometimes for people on the autism spectrum. So you're giving them all that practice if you have a partnership that continues. I call it partnership with I call it partnering with synchrony, that you're going to get some synchrony going between the two of you that then gives them practice when you change it up a little bit. I hope that's clear. It's a big concept. Would love to see more new partnerships showing up in your home. All right, for some reason that's not working, so I'm going to keep doing that. Okay, so this is a really, really big one. I want to make sure that you know that one of my top recommendations when you are dealing with a child who has aggressive behavior, it's tough stuff. Neurologically, you're put in a place where it's really hard. You get triggered easily. It's tough. So I urge you to connect with another adult. Now, that might be your partner, that might be your spouse, but if you are a single parent, find someone who knows your child, hopefully, but not necessarily, who you can simply just vent to. Today was a really rough day. This sucked. I did this and he did this and whatever. Vent. Do not do this in front of your child, however. I'm going to be very clear on that. My whole idea is if a child is being aggressive, they are not a happy kid. And the whole idea is that we want to help build your child's self-esteem and good feelings so they don't feel like they have to use aggression. And so venting is awesome with another adult. Just don't do it in front of your kid. Do it on the phone after they go to bed. Do it, wherever you can, or when your child's at school or something like that. But definitely venting alone helps. And if you vent to somebody else, make sure you tell them, don't try and solve it for me. I just need to vent. Just tell them that, because you probably have a lot of good ideas, and sometimes just venting is all you need. Another one, so this is more for somebody who's in your home with your child. I want to have you think about taking turns. And I have families who have already figured this out, so maybe you are one. So I have families who take turns on, like, I'm going to do bedtime routine Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do it Tuesday, Thursday. So that's one way that you can do it. Another way is to have a code word. So if you're feeling like, okay, well, even on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, when I have bedtime, I get triggered sometimes. And so maybe you have a code word of peanut butter, where if you're starting to feel escalated and like you need a break, you can go peanut butter, because then you're not going to be saying it in front of your child in a way that they will feel, like they've failed or you failed or whatever. It's just a word. And then your partner knows, okay, we're going to switch now. I also have had another family teach this to me a long time ago, that they would go on outings or in the community or whatever, and they would have a kerchief in their pocket or a bandana or a white flag, where if they were on with their child who had aggressive behavior, they had the white flag or the bandana. And when they were done or needed a break, or the other person just simply wanted to take it over, they would switch the bandana. And what that just does is it just relieves you from having to be hypervigilant all the time, and really seriously giving you some time to regroup yourself. So highly recommend both of those things. Connecting with another adult, you really, again, this is tough stuff. You're going to need somebody to problem solve with. So what I mean by this is that what I would love for you to get into is creating a plan with somebody, which we're going to talk about as well, but creating a plan, and then it's not going to work out every single time. And so if you have a time to connect with another adult, for example, every week, you can go, you know what, I had this plan this week, or we had this plan this week. This is what worked with it. This is what didn't work. What's our plan for this next week? So that you get really mindful and deliberate about your supporting your child from and moving them away from being aggressive. Another big one is do not coach each other in the moment. When you are in the middle of the storm of a behavior, the last thing that you are able to do is take in new information, because your whole system is triggered too. So if somebody starts telling you, oh, try this, try this, try this, not only are you going to be adding to the flood to the whole situation, so not declutter, you're actually going to make it more cluttered, right? With either your voice or your body, whatever. So not only that, but then you're also going to make it kind of tough between you and your partner or the other adult that you're connecting with. So don't coach in the moment. But observe, take down notes if you need to or whatever, and come back to it later at a mutually agreed upon time. The other one is back each other up. So you have created by this point, I'm hoping, not today, but after you have watched this whole thing, you're going to have a plan. And you're going to need to back each other up. So if your plan is every time he hits, we're going to stop the action and wait and nothing happens until they're calm, and then we're going to redirect. That is what I would probably recommend. So, but anyway, even in that moment, if you see your partner or the other adult do exactly that and you come in and go, oh no, they're not really meaning it. They don't need to, they weren't really hitting, they were blah, 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 whatever. You just have undermined things. So make sure that you're backing each other up, keeping each other strong too. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this. And I believe in you, that kind of stuff too. And then the last one is very similar, but supporting each other and staying consistent. So keep talking and supporting each other in consistency, because it's really interesting to me anyway. The research in behavior does show that the more inconsistent you are, the behavior actually increases. So if you sometimes respond to a behavior in one way, sometimes you respond in another way, and then sometimes you don't respond at all or whatever, that actually will increase the likelihood of the behavior. And so the more consistent you can across people and across yourself, of course, but then across activities, the better results you will have. The next piece is for you. This is getting into, okay, now let's get down and dirty and let's make sure we're getting information. So we think we have to jump in and figure out exactly what to do right away. Well, you can't. You have to gather information first. And first and foremost, you're always going to ask yourself, is there a medical reason for this behavior? Are they screaming or hitting or kicking or whatever because they don't feel good? I've had kids who had beans up their nose, and we were trying to address a picking his nose behavior before we realized, wait a second, he has a bean up his nose. We didn't know that. I've had kids who hit their faces or bite other people because they have teeth issues going on. So don't discount it too fast. Take a moment and really think about, is there a medical reason why my child is not feeling so great? Then you're going to chase the why, which means getting curious. You're going to go, why is this happening? Why are they doing this? You're going to observe, and you're going to, in lots of different situations, you're going to try and observe your child, what works for them, what doesn't, and you're going to assume intent. I want you to assume that your child wants to do well. Kids are not naturally manipulative. The younger they are, especially, and especially with if they have social engagement needs, that's really high level actually for a child or person to understand how you're feeling to then be able to manipulate that. So that's much higher up developmentally than most of my clients are. And so I want you to assume that your child wants to do well and is, wants to engage with you. There's just something in the way, and we need to gather information to find out what that is. So this takes me to taking data. Doesn't everybody just love data? Just kidding. There's a lot of people who really don't, but it is super, super helpful. So I think of it as kind of two levels. The first level is just doing some tracking of what's going on. And then the second level is to track. So the first one is tracking what's happening kind of behind the scenes, setting events is what I talk about in a minute. And then level 2 is, okay, now let's get nitty gritty and more detailed of what are the triggers, what are the consequences of the behavior, etc. So I'm going to walk through those with us. So the first one, get specific. So right now, actually, I want you to maybe even pause the video, and I want you to get very specific about a behavior that you would like to either increase or decrease that your child is doing. Oftentimes we only talk about decreasing behavior, but I want you to open up your mind to thinking that there might be something you want to increase too. And then I want you to define the behavior very, very clearly and write it down, make it measurable. So if you say, I want my child to stop melting down so much, that is not measurable. I don't know what meltdown means. It means something different to every single parent and child. I will guarantee that. So I want you to maybe make it more clear and say something like, I want my child to stop kicking during transitions, or I want them to stop biting during bath time. Something like that. So really specific. You don't have to make it specific to the activity. That it could just be stop biting. Okay. But biting is really a clear. I know what you're talking about. I assume it's biting somebody else. So you could say biting others. There are kids who bite themselves. And so if that is happening, then be specific about that. But anyway, write it down. Go. Okay. I'm going to move to the next part. So now you have at least one behavior that is very clear. So let's stay with biting. So you're going to then track when it's happening. So when during the day, and you're going to assign a letter. So for biting, you'd say B, okay? Hitting, you might say H. Screaming, you might say S. Use just a simple weekly schedule. You can use this one if you want, but actually the one that I tend to use is a full page and every half hour. You're going to then just write the letter of when it's happening, and I want you to track that for a full week. So you're going to track just when does it happen. What you might find is that it only ever happens on Monday and Wednesday, or it only ever happens after dinner, or it only ever happens whatever. This will give you a little bit of information to go with. It may give you enough information to go with to make a plan. However, it might not. And so this is kind of that next level that you can go to when you are trying to figure out what's going on with a child and why they are being aggressive. So here you'd want to write down the time and date that it happens, the mood or regulation prior to the incident, because sometimes, this alone has been really interesting for me and with families. Sometimes people think, they are biting their brother. And we automatically think it's out of anger. But when they start tracking it, they notice, wait a minute, it's always when they're excited. And it's always when they're hyper aroused in a happy way. And so make sure that you track that, because that's a more regulation issue. But it also, I just had a little guy the other day where he was all happy and engaged and prior, but then he was being aggressive whenever. So the next one is antecedent. So what happened right before the behavior is whenever he would try and interact with his brother, and his brother wasn't interested, even though he's in this great mood, his brother isn't, that's when the behavior would happen. And so then the consequence would be to remove them from each other, or that the brother would be aggressive back, or, there was lots of different things. So anyway, it told us a lot about his intent was to engage with his brother. And so that's a really different thing than when he's just angry, and how we address it. But anyway, I kind of got off topic. So I'm going to go back to this worksheet for a second. So you're going to track the time and day, the mood or regulation, kind of where they were prior to the incident. Antecedent is a fancy way to say trigger. So what happened right before the behavior? What do you think triggered the behavior? Did you ask them to do something? Ask them to clean up, ask them to go to bed, ask them to turn off the TV, whatever. And then the behavior is, what exactly did you witness? Now here you can certainly just use the letter system again if you want to, just B or H for hitting or whatever. That might be easiest, but if you haven't gone to that, you could here write it out. But I like the letters, I'm going to be honest, because then you've already done half the work. And then the last one is consequences. So we often think of consequences as just the way that we handle the behavior, but I want you to open your mind a little bit on this, because I want you to think about what happens after the behavior. So, for example, if a child hits somebody and then they're told to go to their room, the consequence, yes, is told to go to the room, but I want you to think about that he also got time and space to himself. Okay, so you'd still write went to his, or had to go to his room, but the way that we might look at it later as we're thinking about it is, that's something that happened for him that actually worked for him. And so how can we help him have more downtime in his room or to himself, or not get to that point or whatever, so that he isn't needing to hit to get there. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So consequence could be, anyway, it could also be that they got to eat, or they got to leave the table, or they, whatever. So just be really honest, because we are very inconsistent in our consequences also when we are still trying to figure out behaviors. And so be really honest and write them down. So if you scream back at your child sometimes, write it down. There's nobody who's making any judgments except you when you look back at this, and the other adult that you're working with, who probably loses their temper too. So it's a part of parenting, sadly. But be as honest as you can. So the next piece that I'd love for you to think about is to track setting events. Now, this is kind of related to what I was talking about earlier on that form of regulation, or the mood prior. So setting events are things that set a child or yourself, parents, people of any age, up for being on edge already. So I get a lot of, my child just goes 0 to 60. And the hitting comes out of nowhere, the screaming comes out of nowhere. Well, probably not. My guess is, and I say that a child might be riding high already because their stress meter is pretty high, and then there's something that just bumps them over that edge. And so think about what are the things, so track both what stresses your child, but also think about, and maybe take some time to write down, what brings your child's overall stress level down to a more manageable level, so that the spikes aren't as high and taking over that edge into unsafe behaviors like biting, hitting, kicking, etc. Okay? Little tip too, you can do this for yourself as well, which is really important. So this takes me to this, some of you may have seen this before. It's pretty common use of what happens to us, all of us, throughout a day when we have behaviors that aren't so great. I call it the wave of emotion and behavior, because first you're at baseline, kind of to the left of my screen here. You're at baseline, and then you start having things that potentially stress you throughout a day, throughout an hour, whatever. Maybe you were, I always use this one because I'm a huge coffee drinker, but maybe you're out of coffee in the morning. Ooh, that starts me off on a different trajectory. It's not horrible yet, right? But it just sets me off on a little different trajectory. And then you hit traffic on your way to work. Or you have an argument with somebody, or you're worried about someone. Okay, for a child, maybe they had to get up and be rushed to get out the door. And then parent was stressed trying to because there was a traffic jam. And then they get to school and the door is locked, the one that they usually go through. And then they go into a classroom and this happens, whatever. So hopefully you get the point. That it's no one little trigger. It's just a whole bunch of little setting events that get somebody feeling more agitated. And then you hit this top of the peak when no teaching can happen, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because this is the middle of the storm. This is when you say your brain actually neurologically goes offline and goes into fight or flight mode. And people with PTSD can go there much faster and more with so much more intensity. But it really is a time when your brain is not functioning at its best. Your brain goes into that fight, flight, freeze, or faint mode, and your prefrontal cortex is not working at full capacity. So yours isn't as an adult, and children, theirs isn't even developed enough yet until they're in their 20s to be fully functioning, even when they're in a good space. So it really isn't working for them in this moment. So that's why I say no teaching can happen in the middle of the storm. Then what happens next is that you kind of come down, and this looks different for everybody. Sometimes it's really slow, come down, etc. And then a lot of people will come to this place of feeling remorse and feeling sorry for what happens. And so sometimes kids will say, I'm sorry because something had happened, before then they return to regulation. So that's the wave of emotion. I just want to make sure the biggest message here is no teaching can happen in the middle of the storm. That really is just a time to get through. So now I want to speak a little bit more specifically about this phase called escalation stages. Let me see what the next slide is. Yeah, not yet. So in escalation stages, and there is a handout also for this, where it's very similar to the 5-point scale that maybe you've seen at school or in therapy sessions or whatever. It's the idea that we all have that baseline, and so we might want to identify what does your child look like physically when they are at a state of baseline, when they're feeling pretty good, nothing's really challenging them, they're just kind of in a good space. What does that look like? Are they kids who wander around? Are they kids that sit down and play with something? Are they interactive? So just name that and use the form, because that would be like a level 1 is what I would call it. Level 1 would be, this is just baseline. Level 2 is learning zone, kind of the way I think of it. Level 2 and part of level 3 even, but level 2 is learning zone. They're curious, they're interested in things, they're kind of not on edge, but on that, there's something called the zone of proximal development, which is a fancy way just to say they're in the zone, right? They're curious, they're learning, okay? So what does their body look like when that's happening? Then level 3 gets into, okay, they're starting to get a little agitated. There's little things. So some kids might start pacing, or their eyes may start to dart around, or they may start to move around, or they may start, I have one guy who plugs his ears. Even if it isn't an auditory, it's just a way of him going, okay, I'm starting to get a little stressed. So that's level 3. Level 4 is, okay, we're really getting stressed here. We've got to back off on things. But what tells you that your child is at that level where they're about to blow? They're about to hit that, but they haven't yet, but they're about to. So they're about to hit, kick, bite, whatever. But they haven't yet. What do they do before that? What are the indicators to you that they are escalated to that point? And then level 5 finally is, what's the worst of the worst? What are some of the behaviors that your child is capable of that you don't want to see ever again? Okay, so that's level 5. Now, on that form that you can find also is to the right of that. So you have your nice levels 1 through 5, and then the column next to it says what strategies help calm. So that's where you're going to go through each level and think about, okay, so when they're at a level 3, they're agitated, but they haven't really totally, it's not a sure thing that they're going to shoot up and lose their cool. What are some things that help? So just a little hint, some things that help are some of the same things that I talked about in the decluttering. Not talking so much, going quiet, same thing, sorry. Maybe sitting down next to them, maybe taking a sensory break. Those are some things that potentially may help. On the column further to the right is what makes it worse. And so I'm going to use very similar ones, that if your child's at level 3 and you know that talking less or stop talking helps them kind of come back down to a 2, maybe you know that if you start talking or yelling at them or trying to hurry them up, those kinds of things, you know those always make them go up into 4. Those are the things that you're going to put in that column that says what makes things worse. Okay, so play around with that form. I have lots of couples, parents who like to do it for themselves also first, because you'll figure out that it's actually kind of hard to do. And so if you can't go directly to asking your child to do this at any age, because before doing it yourself, because it is pretty tough to do for yourself even. So I do encourage you to try it for yourself first, then for your child. Okay, moving along. The next step is to create a plan and stick to it. So you're going to need to guesstimate a reason. You can estimate, you can decide on the reason, whatever, but the big message is you might not get it right the first time. So you're really guesstimating. You're guesstimating a reason for the behavior based on the information that you gathered. So I want you to assume that it's a can't, your child is not able to do it, versus won't, they're manipulating you, okay? So I don't want to hear that the reason why they're doing this behavior is just to get my goat, because they know it bothers me. That is not a reason. Okay. So you're going to be guessing different reasons, like they're hungry, or they don't have another way to ask for help, or things like that. So you're going to then decide, okay, this is why they're doing this. What is an alternative? So I'm going to use biting because it's an easy one. So you're going to say, okay, they're biting because they don't have a way to explore materials with their mouth. And that's maybe developmentally how they're exploring materials. And so a replacement behavior might be a sensory diet around biting, okay? And what is okay to bite and what's not. So a replacement behavior might be a bite box. A replacement behavior also might be helping that child use a visual to ask for a turn with a toy, or just even how to tap somebody on the shoulder for a turn instead of biting out of frustration or asking for help. So all those things can be a replacement behavior, but you just have to decide on one. Excuse me. Because the next step is to write down your plan on how you're going to teach that replacement behavior. I know this sounds like, oh my gosh, I should know more about this, but I want you to really just let go and just try it out, because it does not have to be perfect. You will have the opportunity. Yes, you're going to try and be consistent for a week, but then you have the opportunity to go back and go, wait, I need to change this. So I do want you to write it down for what the replacement behavior is going to be and how you're going to teach that behavior, and then go for consistency. And again, in the handouts, I do have a create a plan in the bonus section if you do want to do it with a worksheet. You don't have to, but you can. So a couple things I just wanted to say is that when I talk about guesstimating the function of the behavior, some of you may already know that schools will also, if the behavior is happening at school, they call it a functional behavior assessment. You're just doing a mini version of that if you do what I've been talking about, by gathering the information, doing some observation. That's what they call a functional behavior assessment. If your child is having trouble at school or wherever they're receiving services, you can ask for one, where other people will then come in and do some observation, determine why your child is doing something, and then create that behavior plan, which is usually called a positive behavior support plan, PBSP. Okay, I'm going to move us on. So teaching a replacement behavior, I just want to reiterate that you really have to teach a replacement behavior. You just can't just stop a behavior without replacing it. And so just to put those two things together is that if you have a child, for example, I get this one a lot, who is mean to their family dog, their pet, and is only hitting or pulling their hair or whatever, you can't just say, stop it, you need to be nice to the dog. Stop it, you need to be nice to the dog. You have to go, okay, well, what can they do with the dog? Because probably your child wants to interact with the dog and doesn't know how. And so you can't just stop the behavior, because the child's still going to want to try and interact with the dog and see what the dog's going to do, etc. And so replace it with learning how to pet or brush or wash the dog or whatever, or give shake, whatever. So that's why I like this picture, is that this little girl is able to learn how to have the dog shake, and look how thrilled she is. So teach that replacement behavior. Don't just try and stop a behavior. So this one, I just want you to take a moment and really be in the moment that you can create a plan. It doesn't have to just be a dream that you can have a more relaxed home. You can make a plan that includes a few different things, like calming yourself so you can be in the moment. That's a plan. Creating a plan of how you're going to teach replacement behaviors so that your child isn't aggressive with you anymore. It's not just a dream, it's a plan. So back to that plan. The plan should include some of the same things that we were looking at before, of when we were just observing when the behavior happens. We looked at setting events. What was their mood ahead of time? You can now make a plan of how can I make those setting events set my child up for success rather than what is setting them up for failure. Okay? So if you know that your child does much better when they go swimming 2 or 3 times a week, how can you make that happen so that they're at their best and they are regulated and are not going to need to be aggressive? If you know that your child does best if they have a snack after school or during the day at a certain time, then let's make sure that happens. Those kinds of things. Antecedents, again, is that fancy word for triggers. So you're going to say, okay, in this new plan that's teaching this new behavior, what should happen right before? So if you're teaching how to gain somebody's attention by tapping on their shoulder or by putting their hand on their shoulder, you, instead of hitting, you might say the antecedent would be that the adult is holding something that they want. Okay? So you're holding a cup of juice. And then the child needs to put their hand on the shoulder, and that's the target behavior. And then the consequences when they do that, because you're teaching that, then the consequence is that they get the juice. Okay? So really that simple. Don't make it too complicated. But the other piece that I want to mention is making sure that you do practice times often. We go straight to the hardest time and go, that's what we want to change. How many families come in and go, I want to address bedtime because that's when kids are tired and etc. Well, that's not a time to practice, is the hardest time. You need to practice when your child is regulated, when they're feeling good. Practice a new skill when they're at their best, not when they're at their worst. Then, once they've learned the skill, then you can bring it into those tough times if your child doesn't bring it in naturally, okay? The last question is that on the plan is just make sure that you are thinking about who needs to be involved in implementing this plan. So maybe it's just you. Maybe it's you and your partner or co-parent. Maybe it's teacher. Maybe it's a care provider that comes on a twice weekly basis. Maybe it's grandma or grandpa. But get them involved too, so you can get that consistency, and so your child really understands quickly that this behavior is not going to work and this behavior does and meets the same need. So Dan Siegel, who wrote The Power of Showing Up with Tina Bryson, in a recent discussion with him, he called parents neurosculptors and professionals and teachers. And I love that term because it's really the fact that the more that you give your child that practice I was just talking about and opportunities to practice, the more you're actually changing their brain and the way that they think about things and think about themselves, and they're able to solve problems. So through that practice, you are giving that brain exercise. That's why I like this picture. And you are neurosculptors to help your child learn better ways. to get their needs met. All right. So I've talked about all the things of like what to do to prevent and to teach new. All right. So I do want to talk for a second about, okay, we all have the storm happen. Even if we've tried to do everything right, we still have moments like this when the, poop hits the fan. Okay. So here are some tips. Number 1, stop talking. Basically batten down the hatches. So if you're in the middle of a storm, it's not going to be the time to build something up. You're just going to be batten down the hatches, staying safe. You're going to ride out the storm. It's not a time for teaching. So that's at that escalation top of the peak of the wave of emotion and behavior that I showed a minute ago. So you're going to ride out the storm. You're going to slow down. You're going to get safe. No teaching. And the last part is that you're going to put a flag in it. So you're going to say to yourself, wow, okay, I'm just going to get through this moment, but I'm going to remember that this happened, okay? Because I want you to put a flag in it so that it's something you will return to and try again. If you just stop everything and your child never goes back to that situation again or any sort of semblance of it, they're not going to ever learn how to manage it. Sometimes we'll just say, oh, we'll never do that again. And we stay away from that, but that's not teaching your child anything. So put a flag in it and then think about, okay, how can I come back to that time and make it more successful? So with that, so if you remember, the wave of the storm is that they escalate, we all escalate, we hit the peak where no teaching can happen, they come back down, and coming back down is going to take what's called co-regulation. Sometimes kids need to borrow your fully formed prefrontal cortex to be able to partner with that synchrony, that back and forth, to be able to regulate their systems again. They're borrowing it from you. And then that's when you can return to the flag and try again in maybe a modified way. So I know I'm talking kind of in general terms, so I'm trying to be specific. So okay, I have a girl who comes in here on a weekly basis, and I know that I can get kind of a nice back and forth with her, but then when I do something that is too unpredictable, something that surprises her too much, that she will get aggressive. So instead of my going, oh, I'm never going to challenge her and be unpredictable, instead I go, okay, that was too much. I put a flag in it and I re-regulate, I make it easy again, and then I go, okay, now I'm going to try a smaller challenge, less unpredictable, but something that she can still manage. So I'm still helping her learn to re-regulate herself when things change. So I hope that helps. It could be as simple as something like a bedtime routine. I'm going to use that again. Toothbrushing. You could, that when you're brushing teeth, for example, and that you get to a point where it really doesn't work and you have a big aggressive scenario, that then you might have to stop. Well, you're not going to say, well, I'm never going to brush their teeth again. You're going to come back to that and after you re-regulate and then figure out a new way to brush teeth. So I hope that helps. So I had somebody in the group ask me specifically about screaming. And so I did want to just let you know that I included a tip sheet that I created a couple of years ago with a really good friend and colleague, Christy Preddy-Franzak, on screaming in particular. And so please check that out if you do have somebody who's screaming. And we're going to, in live session, talk about that a little bit as well. So some of the same things that you've heard me say already is that you're going to ask if there's a medical reason. You're going to figure out what time of day does it happen. You're going to try, if you haven't offered alternatives, you are going to do that first and observe different things, make changes to the environment. You're going to practice a different way. You're going to redirect the behavior whenever possible. You're going to encourage co-regulation, and you're going to return to the situation again, returning to that flag. So that's just putting it all together. It could be screaming, it could be biting, it could be hitting. They're all very similar. Bottom line is that I want you to be willing to experiment. You're probably not going to get it right away. You're probably not going to get it right away, but keep trying. And remember, the kids do well if they can, and it's probably a can't versus a won't. Turn frustration into fascination. Why? Chase the why. Why is my child doing this, and how can I help them replace that behavior with something that could work better? You're going to have to experiment. Sometimes you're going to fail. It's not going to work. You'll learn something, and then you go back and you repeat it with that new information and experiment again. So thank you very much, and email me with questions. I'm happy to answer them, and especially if you need more information on any particular topic covered today. Thanks very much.